I'm going to try to give an intro to the guy who needs no introduction. Tyler Robbins has 2+ decades of security experience in both offensive and defensive spaces. He's also worked with some of the most prestigious companies leading teams of elite operators. He specializes in red teaming, APT threat modeling, black box network penetration testing, and physical and social engineering, which we're going to hear about today. He's worked at all kinds of places, including Silent Break Security and Guardians, Nisos, and now Trimarc. So with no further introduction, I'll hand it over to you, Tyler.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. It was a great summary. All right. Well, appreciate everybody taking some time today to hop in and sit with me through this awesome talk. This is a talk I've been working on for a little while. I've been doing pen testing for quite a while. And part of, before all the color, before we had a lot of the red team kind of stealthy aspect, we had, physical pen tests were still a thing. There were still stealthy pen tests, black boxes. This is kind of a culmination of a lot of lessons learned and then a lot of pro tips. Since this is an offensive talk, I'm super excited because I'm not going to get into too much of the defensive or mitigation side of this. So the talk's called Breaking and Entering, a hacker's field manual for physical access. And this talk is really, really geared around a lot of what we've traditionally thought of as red teaming or parts of red teaming where we're doing physicals. But before I get into some of that, kind of who am I? All right, why do you want to sit here and pay attention to me and this talk? Really, you don't have to. Most of us red teamers get bored very easily, so I understand if you kind of nod off. Hopefully, we'll keep this interesting with some stories. But I'm a 20-year hacking veteran. I started in sysadmin, network admin, phone phreaking way back in the early 90s. Definitely did the hacking kind of before it was a paid gig, and you now don't have to go to jail and make good money. It's a fantastic thing. I'm a co-host on 15-year-old security podcast for Security Weekly. I'm an offensive red teamer. I try to break just about whatever there is out there, whether that's, my garage door opener, my smart fridge, really anything that has electricity to it. I tend to try and figure out how it works and how to break it. I specialize a lot in ICS, physical red teaming, highly boutique and stealthy pen tests. I've kind of migrated that route. Trying to get into a little bit more of the very strategic and niche spaces because, again, red teamers get bored. We're very, very hard to retain our attention. And so we kind of have to move on to the next shiny thing. I'm also a trainer and speaker. I've taught at Black Hat, Exploiting ICS class, Dark Side Ops course. I've spoken at many, keynoted many conferences and done many talks. You can look some of those up. Some of them are recorded. Some of them are prior to that. But all that is to say, connect up. This is a small community. I really, really love this community, and I enjoy trying to help facilitate the next people coming up or coordinate and collaborate with any of the old timers that have the reminiscent stories and knowledge and wisdom. So you can find me on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch. So what can you expect from this talk? Really, we're going to cover a few things. We're going to get into Physical 101. What is a physical penetration test? What is a physical engagement? What's the point of doing physicals? I'll have a couple tales of some fun initial access, why some of our full scope red teams have gone really, really right because of physical, and how some of them went really wrong. We'll kind of cover a little bit of how to demonstrate impact using physical penetration tests, where and why you'd use it in engagement, where probably most likely you won't use it in an engagement and why you shouldn't use an engagement. We'll cover a little bit of social engineering. There's tons of great talks on social engineering and kind of how to do that right. We'll get into a couple pro tips. In fact, I leave a whole bunch of slides on pro tips. I may or may not get to it. There's a 45-minute talk, and that's a very difficult time to fit a lot of decades of physical stories within inside of. So we'll see how far we get. I'll cover some of the tools of the trade, some of my favorite tools, maybe some things you've used, maybe some things you haven't used, things that make the operations useful and easier. And then we'll have some more stories, hopefully. So, welcome to 2021. 2020 really sucked. 2021 is starting to get better, but I'm still not a huge fan. We definitely know that work from home and all the ransomware and threats and breaches and nightmares that are happening in today's threat landscape is adding to this global pandemic. So yeah, there's a 600% increase in cybercrime, and that's probably a very low and conservative number, honestly. And I think that physical in and of itself is going to become very, very important, and not just in the next coming months, but more 2022. I foresee a lot of places going back from work from home into offices. There's a lot of physical spaces that have been, left neglected, maybe had very quick migrations to work from home. So there's a ton of risk around physical that I believe needs to be highlighted and identified, which is why I think physical assessments still have their place and can be very valuable in today's threat landscape. But first, let's kind of talk about Physical 101. What is a physical? So physical assessment really is trying to understand what your risk is from the physical world. That could be anything from network jacks, that could be building security, that could be man traps, it could be badging systems. There's a lot to it, but anything that kind of has a physical aspect where computers plug in, where the cyber, go ahead and drink. We're going to have some buzzwords in here where cyber and kinetics kind of comes together, building automation systems, fire systems. All of these are kind of the physical aspects of our world, and a corporation, an organization has physical assets attached to it, no matter how you look at it. A computer has to exist, there has to be connections made, and there has to be data that's accessed by clients. And so when we look at all of this, you can have all the protections in the world on your external environment. You can have a ton of visibility, a SOC, a NOC. You can have all of this protection, but if you're not doing anything on the physical side and someone can get in, you've got either a flat network or you're just hardening a couple external core layers and someone's able to get past those via physical means, then really those can be exploited and should be identified as a means of business risk. And when we start to talk about, Joe's talk was fantastic, where it went into really considering how Red Team and physical and penetration tests and vulnerability assessments, how all those things fit in and play to the business side of this. At the end of the day, we are, in a sense, a part of Blue, and we're all capitalists. The business's job is to make money. And so we really have to identify and look at the businesses and understand those business risks and provide them the opportunity to make good decisions based off the most information. Physical plays into that whole picture as well. We really must understand what our physical risk is to the business so that they can identify those and then start to either invest money, change the culture, look at the fear or potential risks that could come from doing certain aspects or purchasing buildings, changing to a full cloud or remote work from home environment. There's a ton of things that must be considered as far as physicals go. And so physical assessments in and of themselves, they really are designed to kind of outline what that business risk is to the organization from a physical aspect. So when we talk about a physical penetration test, we really are kind of talking about two different things. One, we're talking about what things can be accessed from the physical side of an organization with two different goals. One is usually to demonstrate business risk, and that's usually demonstrated through a red team engagement or some kind of stealthy exercise. But what's the point of the physical as part of those engagements? And that's usually part of obtaining initial access. When you're demonstrating the business risk for physicals, the initial access is usually the goal. You're trying to gain access into a network. Now, this is often a little bit easier than getting by some of the new spam and EDR and AV protections that are being implemented. It's pretty hard to get some of the fishes in without some, next level F#, as Chris was demonstrating in his last talk. You have to get a little bit creative with your payloads, your deliveries, staging, getting infrastructure right, having redirectors. All those things play into doing some of the initial access remotely. But if you can just go social engineer your way into, say, a data closet or a receptionist desk where you implant the receptionist computer, you plug a network device, behind the reception directory. There's a million ways that you can do some of these physical things. It gains you much easier access to the network, where you can begin having that entry point or that beachhead to an organization. And so when we're talking about a physical penetration test, we're really trying to understand, how are we demonstrating risk? What is the the challenge and what is the problem we're trying to solve for the business? Is it to identify the risk of what happens if someone gets physical access? Or is it to test the physical capabilities and resiliency of an organization and what the blue team's response to those physicals? Oftentimes you can gain initial access via physical means, and that becomes very difficult for a incident response team to kind of find. It's not within inside their asset inventory. It's on a port, maybe connected through an ACK bypass where you're leveraging another device. Maybe it's leveraging a cellular service to have an egress point and all the data traffic's going around your firewall. All these things are very interesting ways to demonstrate that risk, to obtain initial access, but also to evaluate what the physical risk is to the org and how they can begin to protect that. And so why would you want to incorporate some of that? Again, we kind of covered that you want to incorporate that maybe to demonstrate that risk. But there's also other means or reasons that you're going to do physical assessments. Some of those are often trying to demonstrate impact to an organization that may be a little bit less mature. Now, this is not something I typically recommend, but there are a lot of cases where security teams have a hard time getting the upper level buy-in. They have a hard time getting the culture to change. And so sometimes you must demonstrate impact. And physical assessments are great stories. They're very, very sexy and intriguing to executives. And it often demonstrates a very good impact from a full chain attack report for the executives to look at. If you're evaluating this and you do initial access or assume breach and it's not a mature organization, oftentimes they're going to say, well, we gave them access. They don't fully understand the time constraints or the budget constraints that are often associated with an engagement or initial access. And so you do have to prove that impact, and this is an easy and valuable way to kind of gain that. So how are physical pen tests done? This is a pretty broad question, and there's a million ways that a lot of people have done this. Having done this for over a decade, there's a ton of stories and a ton of means that we've kind of done this, whether it's utilizing hardware OT, whether we're coming in as a UPS driver, fire protection services, elevator technicians, copy repair technicians. There's a ton of ways to do this. But overall, when we're talking about how physical assessments are done, you're really trying to understand what are the rules of engagement? Are we going full red team, full stealth, where everything's in play? Vendors are in play, janitors are in play, social engineering's in play, all remote offices are kind of in play. By any means necessary, gain access. And so there's a lot of ways to kind of articulate what the rules of engagement should be, and those should be very well drawn out. But as we go through that, that really determines how these are done. You can be as simple as, can you just get in through the front door? Do you have the capability to do social engineering to gain access to one particular office location? Well, that's how that engagement would be done. That would be outlined by the rules of engagement. That's the objective and how you would go to achieve that. So really trying to play with inside those rules, because once you start to talk about physical engagements, it can get really sketchy based on where you're doing them. Many of these we've done out of the country, and there's countries that have very different rules, very different prisons that you can go to, very different ways that they would like to make you disappear. So these things have to be well thought out. Things like, are there dogs? Are there armed guards? Is this part of a military installation? All of these things need to be considered, and you need to be very clear. You can't just go and start doing physicals. I would definitely recommend, if you're getting into this space, working with companies, even if it's just to reach out and consult, one-on-one from a personal standpoint on some lessons learned, some things to think about that will keep you from getting shot, because there are times that we've ended up outside of embassies with guns pointed at our heads, or security guards that are not well trained drawing guns for very little probable cause. So you have to be very careful when you start to talk about physicals, because this is where safety and getting arrested and long-term implications. If you look at something like the guys that got picked up at the courthouse, there's physical and long-term implications to how that plays out, both politically and personally. So some of the fun things, like as we talk about this, there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of things to consider. We've started to lay out some of the dangers of doing some of the physical pen tests, but let's talk about some of the tools of the trade. This is often a fun place. People with inside of the offensive space, defensive space. We're all a bunch of nerds at the end of the day. We love hardware. We're all gadget nerds. So some of the tools of the trade are really fun to kind of play with. It makes you feel like James Bond. So I'll kind of cover a couple of the tools just because it's a very interesting and fun thing to kind of get into. I highly recommend knowing what some of the vulnerabilities of physical security are from some of these tools, and then playing with these tools to kind of grasp how the world works. It changes your mindset once you start to get into physicals of how things are protected. Some stuff like biometrics and HID badges, how those can be bypassed becomes very quickly, you start to realize how dangerous the world could be, and you start to do the criminal thing every time you walk into a place. You evaluate where all the cameras are, what sensors are using, what kind of alarm panel, if there's sticky notes all over the place, what kind of biometrics they might be using, how you go about breaking those. So it gets really fun when you start to identify some of the tools of the trade and how these tools actually work on the back end to bypass many of the controls that are in place that we see and rely on every day throughout our life. So when I start to talk about some of the tools, this is just a summary list. I'm actually going to put up a full physical loadout. I've been working on this for a little while. I tried to drop some of my favorite tools that are very useful just to kind of cover some of the things that we're going to talk about. From those, things like Esp Keys. Now, not many of you are, if you're not familiar with some of the physical aspects or haven't gotten into some of the HID, an Esp key is essentially a little device you can plug in on the back of a badge reader. The badge readers you see outside of a lot of secure locations. It utilizes a Wiegand protocol. We can actually take that panel off real quick, punch down 4 wires, and shove that back into the wall. And we've got a wireless access point that we can look at on our phone. We can capture people that badge in, the credentials clear text, even the PIN code that they use afterwards. All of that can be done very, very easily with an Esp key. In fact, I've got one right here. I'll just pull it out. One of the other things that people often ask, I can't really get into all the tools because there's, from a physical aspect, I would have a whole floor laid out here of tools. But typical loadouts, as you're starting to do some physicals, you'll learn you carry most of your stuff in your pocket. You try and be very inconspicuous. You're usually in a suit or at least business casual. So you got a USB drive, maybe a couple little gadgets that you stuffed away. You're not really kitted out. You're not trying to be tactical and black with a backpack and all the gear. But people often ask you what you typically carry in your pocket. And there's a couple things that's on this list. Traveler's hook for bypassing doors. You got some. This is actually weed eater wire that we use to slide behind the metal plates that protect doors from being shimmed. Lots and lots of keys. I mean, elevator keys, once you start to get into this, if you learn some of the OT and some of the physical side, like you end up with a substantial amount of keys for different elevators, different locks. You'd be surprised how many locks rely on master keys and standardized keys for access. Things like being an elevator technician, where you can override an elevator, get to restricted floors that maybe require badge access. That's when fire keys come into play, maintenance keys. Things like, obviously, duckies or bash bunnies. These have scripts that run as a keyboard or HID device. You got things like conboot, which allow you to bypass logins for most modern Windows operating systems, including domain ones, with a few tricks, which I think I listed in the pro tips. Shims, obviously a set of picks. Some leashy lock picks are kind of nice, but one of the main things, obviously, that we do carry is, in fact, I'd probably say an Esp key, a drop box, and maybe a traveler's hook are probably the 3 things that I carry in my pocket at all times on all physicals. But something like a little Esp key here, right here, is just a little dongle you punch into the back of an HID badge reader, allow you to bypass those badges. Those things are all fun and dandy. I would definitely learn a few of these tools, learn how they work, do some research. I'll try and provide some links when I do the physical loadout with shopping lists and things, things like liquid plastic you can shim behind doors and locks. All these are very useful. They're all useful to really try and obtain access where you shouldn't gain access. It's bypassing controls, just like in a network. There's a ton of gear. You're really trying to, print badges, pretend to be someone else, clone badges, get within 5 feet of someone and I can clone an RFID badge in different frequencies. Pretend to be someone. This is all to gain access to a network. That's physical 101. But with all that gear and all of this tech and all these cool gadgetries, USB plugs that record video, looks just like a USB charger, putting that at the help desk or at the reception or at the security desk, so you can record video and go back and pick it up later, pick it up on Wi-Fi. All those are really, really cool. And you think about all this gear and all the things that you may have to try. Really, I'm going to tell you, in fact, I got a little demo video here of one of the hardware organizations I've broken into. All that gear, and really it comes down to most of the time that I get in, it's usually bypassed using simple devices, something like a piece of paper. And this was a bank in downtown New York, very, very notable bank. I was up there trying to figure out how to get in. I didn't have anything with me at that time. I was just doing recon, and like always, I happened to make it past the guard's desk after I, provided a name. He let me up on the elevator. I was able to figure out the floor from the fire map. And because I didn't have anything, I had to figure out how to bypass the security. Well, this could be done with a exit. Most doors have a push to exit or a motion to exit. It's part of fire safety. It's part of safety controls, part of the building security and code. So when people walk up to the door, they have to be able to exit. Sometimes you have to push a button. Sometimes you show up and touch the handle and it creates a circuit. Sometimes it's got motion that detects heat. This one happened to be a top motion sensor, and I was able to put a piece of paper underneath my armpit that I found in the conference room right next to it. After I grabbed my cup of coffee from obviously the vending machine, because I always have a cup of coffee to look like I blend in a nice suit. But I take this piece of paper and I'm able to enter a very secure location, and we're able to implant multiple devices by bypassing the login using a single piece of paper. So all that technology, and we can do this by sliding a piece of paper in a nice glass door. You see the motion activate, and boom, we're into a nice secure location. Alarms aren't activated yet because I came at a very precise time when the janitors were still cleaning. Motion sensors and alarms are typically not activated while the janitors are there. Sometimes janitors are very helpful. If you blend in and are nice to them, don't rat them out. They're very helpful for helping you find places or get access to things. And, you may have left your keys at home and you can't get access to your office. But just real quick, HID badge, exit, and a piece of paper. Boom, you can get into a lot of places. And this applies to many of the jobs that I've done. And so as we start to think about all the gear and getting into this, making sure that you realize that you can do this with good people skills. You can do this by keeping your wits about you, being very smooth talking, having good stories and backstops, understanding the business, doing your recon and homework prior to this. It becomes very, very trivial once you start to do this enough. In fact, you start to lose some of the adrenaline because you get so good at this, where you can get into just about any place that you can think of by looking at a place and finding the weaknesses. And this is the goal of the physicals, really, whether you're gaining access physically for initial access on a red team, or you're trying to demonstrate physical access as part of an engagement. You're demonstrating means that an attacker could bypass physical controls in order to gain access to digital assets. That could be computers, that could be data centers, that could be access to physical files that are stored in file cabinets or jump drives. And in fact, we found many financial organizations that have secure jump drives with backups and case files on them. Well, on top of those jump drives, it's usually written the password and the secure codes, but the goals are often to gain access to those jump drives that are stored in a secure facility. Taking them offline was their security by design, but if we can demonstrate risk, the business risk of us gaining access to those files through physical means, then they have to think of that defense in depth and put different controls or multiple controls in place to try and evaluate how do you protect those digital assets that may be physical. One other great quick story was motion sensors we ran into. Again, the least technical way typically wins. We found another financial institution we're trying to get into. There's motion sensors all over the place. Now, the motion sensors you could see were armed during the day, but they didn't do anything. So prior to going in at night, we went through and just took some white stickers and placed it over the motion sensors, obviously very covertly, and we had distractions and checking cameras. We mapped out our path to get into this place. but this was a hallway up to a parking garage that had motion cameras that went on after night. So we put the stickers over them during the day. When it came back at night, we were able to bypass the alarm and motion sensors to gain access to parking garage, where we jumped across a man bridge. Obviously, we went to the 3rd floor, jumped down to the 2nd floor man bridge, got access to the roof, and came in through a roof hatch that gave us access to HVAC. With inside of that, there's network appliances, there's network connections. We actually triggered one of the door alarms for that roof access. And, we told the technician or the security guard that we were working really late, and he escorted us out the building so we didn't have to go back out the roof access. And we gained access to a couple other things while he was letting us out. So some very fun stories. Obviously, again, physical is very fun. It's very sexy from a story standpoint. But you have to be very clear about your goals. Most of the time, most places don't need a physical. Physical is a huge risk, but there's a ton of politics and a ton of things that are non-technical that play into this that I'll get into a little bit later in this talk. So initial access. Again, we're covering the physical security risks. You're trying to evaluate whether you can gain long-term initial access. When you plug in these devices, again, if you've got something like a cellular backup, you can gain access and maintain that persistence and access into a network for a very long time. It's very hard if they don't have NAC or asset inventory or ports locked down with specific identities. All of those things are very, very hard to go and find this kind of patient zero that's plugged into the network that's conducting attacks, or that allows you to move laterally or gain credentials, maintain access into the network. Because if you can kick someone out or block a C2 channel, that's one thing. But if you have a persistent access that's coming across cellular or Wi-Fi, and you've always got network access, then it's just, again, a matter of time before you're able to run something like Responder or find credentials, or utilize that network access to jump to your next victim and start over again. So attackers have a very hard time kicking people out when they're establishing physical presence on the network outside of their control. So a couple fun pictures here. Obviously, right on the lower left-hand corner, you see a fluorescent light. We were able to utilize one of my implant boxes, which are right there in the middle. They're just a little Windows device. They have a LTE connection and wireless and a network jack. This one actually we were able to place with inside of the hallway between buildings and plug it into a battery pack. And we were able to crack the wireless password and gain access to that network and our C2, obviously, over wireless. So we didn't even have to plug in this device with inside of the network, and thus we didn't have to get into their man traps in a very secure location. We just implanted this physical device within range of the wireless and put it behind the fluorescent light. And we could go back and change those batteries out whenever we wanted, because it was physical access between the breezeways there. Same thing with exits. There's power into that. You can vampire clip into that power behind an exit box, and you can dump a pretty persistent LTE box behind there. As long as you've got access to the network over wireless, it makes for pretty easy access. And then obviously the security desks. It's one of my favorites to gain access to security desks when they're off chasing us around, or we got false flag operations going on. Well, we've got other physical operators in the area. They'll be off looking for us, and we can gain access to their device and see what they see. We'll often implant those and see the security logs, look at the cameras, and see what they're after. So again, initial access is fun. It's very hard to find. And there's some specific tools and protections that you have to put in place to make that a viable way. And a lot of people really have a hard time with the physical side of that. They say it's cheating, it's too easy. And again, if the assessment makes sense and the organization is mature enough to understand the game, and you're already at a red team, which should be a very mature organization, you really come down to the fact that attackers don't care about safety. They don't care about playing by the rules. They don't care about how they gain access. And so defenders have a hard time grasping that. They're usually playing by the rules. They're playing inside of a box. They know that attackers don't play by the rules, but they don't realize how dirty sometimes we can get. Coming in and checking off fire extinguishers, that's pretty dirty, right? So really making sure that the culture understands and fits and can understand the reason or the goals behind doing physical engagements. So a couple quick recon tips. I like to throw some tips here and there. Like I said, I have some pro tips at the very end. It's a very incomplete list. I couldn't get them all on some slides, but for recon, again, USB and recordings, putting those little USB chargers that actually work. They have cameras in them with SD cards and wireless access to pull the videos off. You can put one of those at most receptionist desks or at a security guard desk. Just by sitting there and talking, waiting for them to turn their back or lose attention, you can just kind of plop that in underneath the backside of the desk, and it gives you great visibility into the comings and goings of traffic. Even if you plug it into the lobby, into the corner by an ATM machine or a vending machine, gives you an idea of who's coming, what vendors show up, what the janitorial crews times are. All those things are important. Getting pictures of sign-in sheets. This is why we usually have to have multiple operators. You don't want to burn too many faces. So getting pictures at the clipboards for sign-in, see who the vendors are, who's coming regularly, maybe making badges or identities for some of those people or companies. Digital directories, if they've got some of the touchscreen digital directories outside of the lobby or downstairs in very large buildings, getting layouts, floors, office numbers, contacts, so you can have your homework done and you can ask for certain people, because you will get asked, and you have to be able to think on your feet and have very clear understanding of what the organization looks like. Fire escape floor plans, those are required by code. They're all over the place. You can get a great map of the building internally, and usually without getting on camera. Most of the parking garages or outside fire escape rooms, there's a map right off the side of those. So getting a quick map, having that visual, very quickly identifying what your routes are in and out, how to get to where you're trying to go, and how to get out without getting caught. Knowing what kind of doors they have, are they alarm doors? All these things are really important for the recon. Utilizing social media, looking at YouTube videos, marketing material. There's lots of those that have badges. Maybe the company T-ball game, everybody's wearing their badge, they got their pictures together. You can get a ton of information of what the culture looks like, what badging looks like, how the internal layout of many factories are. They'll do a walkthrough and they're trying to do a news coverage story. All those things are great for recon. OT knowledge for the win. For most of you that aren't familiar, OT, which is the operational technology, which is ICS, SCADA, building automation, fire protection systems, knowing how all of those work, knowing what the regulations are, knowing the lingo. All those become very important in hopping in and doing physical engagements, because you'll find that there's very few restrictions and very few questions asked if you show up with the right clipboard, with the right hard hat, with the right regulations or lingo. Knowing if it's that time of year for fire safety checks, whether they're looking at their extinguishers, whether they're validating water pressure in a building. You can gain access to very interesting utility rooms that may have communications with inside of them just by understanding and knowing the OT or building automation side of this. Good friend Deviant here, we gained some interesting access leveraging elevator technicians. We could speak the language, we knew what elevators they were, we knew what keys we need to use, we locked out the elevators, we gained access to unique locations because of that. But that's all because you've established that knowledge and built that hacker mindset of always having to understand the why and the where, because all of that knowledge, you may not think whatever you're doing right now comes into play, but all that knowledge at some point will come into play. There was a very interesting story about a data center, and having worked in a data center, I knew about some of the fire protection systems within inside of certain areas of that data center. And because I could speak that lingo that I learned 10 years ago that I never thought I'd need to know, it actually got me access straight into the data center to implant a surge strip that had a device with inside of it. So those little bits of knowledge that you can pick up if you want to go learn some of this, learn the keys, learn some of the OT technologies, all those will play into your role as a good offensive person and defensive person. Knowing those little tidbits will pay off. It may be 10 years down the road, you may not ever know if it pays off, but learning those things and having that hacker mindset of always wanting to continually learn becomes even more important when you're starting to talk about the physical aspects. So how are some of these things being abused? I kind of went through a few of these, like utilizing, obviously, elevator technicians, ICS, UPS drivers. There's a ton of ways that these are being abused. And honestly, showing up with a clipboard, a badge, and a good backstory, and doing your homework and knowing people's names and knowing how to get out of situations or talk your way through situations, that's how those are typically abused. there was this very large health organization that we were trying to get into. And as we were trying to figure out how to get into this, like having a huge backstory and really understanding and doing your homework prior, we were able to get badges. We printed those off. We learned who was at the location, who the managers were. We knew who we were targeting for some phishing stuff. But utilizing this, I was able to get around a man trap. It was a very secure location. We obviously tailgated in. We learned that we had to have a certain type of badge to get it to beep, and it beeped red or green. The beep was the same, so we just pretended to badge in, and people hold the door for you. And you have a man trap with a security desk. So we were able to get past all this. The man trap was broken, and we ran past. We walked very quickly, pretending to be on the phone, doing some diversion. Security guard definitely seeing it, but we dove off and caught a tailgate through the next security door and went to the bathroom and hid out there. They searched high and low for us, but we couldn't get in anywhere, and I ended up having to go back out that man trap because it was a one-way exit. Everything else was alarmed. And when I went out there, the head of global security for this very, very large organization that had multiple global offices, obviously, he was actually there that week. And they were all up in the uproar. They detained me. I had my badge. It looked legit enough that he couldn't even tell the difference. But I didn't have the proper lanyard. So I got definitely reprimanded. He was looking me up, trying to find me. But because I'd done my homework and because I knew my backstory and I knew the company, I knew they had an office back east. I said I was a new intern there. I flew out here to talk to a couple people at the location to see if it was going to be a good fit, if I should move out and relocate. After he did a bunch of his research, he ended up letting me go, but he called me on my bluff, and I said I was here to meet a certain person that worked there. And I'd done my research, who she was. I looked at her Facebook. I knew her kid was in T-ball. He walked me all the way 4 buildings away to meet this person, and he gave me a proper lanyard, told me, I would be fired in any other situation, but I was new, so I was good. Gave me a proper lanyard, put my badge that I'd printed, it was fake, in there, and walked me to this lady. This lady, I said, I knew her, we were friends, our kids played T-ball together, pulled her out. She had no idea who I was. He called my bluff. I was like, no, I bought in, I doubled down. No, you remember I sat next to you. We were asking at that T-ball game, the one where we lost. She's like, oh, yeah, I kind of remember. Like, sorry, it's been a while. Like, I don't really remember. And very, very awkward conversation. Anyways, I just went through my story, had rehearsed because I knew someone. I had a good backstory, and I knew the situation of the interns and the other location. The head of global security, physical security at this place, ex-Marine, very big guy, very serious. He actually let me off. I didn't have to produce my paper. I didn't get caught. We were very early in a very big red team. He walked me back, gave me the 10th degree lecture, play all to the psychology of letting him mentor me, playing the, figuring out how to establish that dominance, let him speak. All those things, those psychology things all play in. You have to be very cool on your feet, and you have to play these things out. Sometimes you have to fully buy in. So really knowing your backstory and understanding how these different techniques are abused and how to play these out becomes very important. Again, sorry for rushing through this. This is a very, very short time to do this particular presentation, so I'm trying to get through some of the stories and speak very quickly. So I apologize if you have to go listen to this on 0.5. I usually do not speak this fast, and I try to articulate a little bit better. But this is actually another great abuse that we have to start to think about. There are mechanisms within inside of all physical things, whether it's doors, you see me abuse, exit systems with a piece of paper, padlocks and locks can be abused with things like picks, with things like bypass tools. In fact, this is a particular A-bus lock that has a vulnerability with inside the third wheel that you can actually bypass this padlock. And this actually houses a very secure power battery plant that's out in the middle of nowhere. And physical was a huge deal to them because you could take down the power for a very large geographic region. So you do have to think about things like what can be bypassed and what's protecting them. But additionally, if you notice, I'm wearing steel-toed boots. I've got a safety vest on. I've got a hard hat. I've got tucked in shirt. All of these things, I wouldn't have even gotten past stage one or known where this facility was, because you have to understand what regulations control different physical aspects. If you go into industrial plants or you're going into a food plant, you have all white gowns. You check in and gown up in a clean room. So you make sure you understand the different regulations and controls at each of the facilities, just so you can get to the point where you can start to abuse some of the technologies or bypass some of the locks. So dress code is a huge thing. Overdressing is always a good tactic, but making sure that you blend in, you don't overcall yourself, but you're also covering down on the things that are required for an organization. But this is a great bypass. I can show you how fast we can bypass a quick lock with just a piece of metal and a shim. And this gained us access to a VPN back to a very large organization that maintained this power plant. So again, this is a physical shim. You're basically taking the pick and you're shoving it right between that third wheel and pushing up, and you can get the collar to release, and boom, you're into a secure cabinet in the middle of nowhere, where physical then translates into digital. You've now got network access in a place that you're probably not going. They're going to have a very hard time finding and looking at, and they're going to have to send a technician out. By that time, hopefully, you pivoted through the network. Again, here's another one. Common exit doors. These doors are locked. There's always these push exits at most places. This is a safety feature, and by design, you'll notice that a lot of physical things rely on safety, and you typically end up bypassing some of these controls because of safety. Things like fire locks, so firefighters can get up and down, get the elevator to move where you want it to go, and these doors. There's a great door tool. You push this through, and you're able to bypass. You're able to bypass many door locks. So just by taking the hook, passing it through, grabbing the bar, and pushing it open from the inside, you can do the same with a push to exit button. So again, very interesting techniques from a physical standpoint that are fun to talk about and work with. We've already talked a little bit about fire safety, elevators, building automation. We've seen these abused in the news. Attackers are definitely going out after them. They're older OT systems, some of them vulnerable. They're designed to be installed and maintained for 10 plus years. But not only that, these utility rooms and closets, so you can often gain access through parking garages or off the main building. They'll often have diagrams. You look at that middle picture, you've got an alarm system with blueprints there. You've got network jack right below that, and phone numbers and codes that have the different vendors within inside of them. So gaining access to each one of these rooms, you can demonstrate not only kinetic, you could shut off all the hot water, you could adjust pressure, you can cause a building alarms to go off, but you can also gain intelligence and reconnoiter the building through a lot of the information gained in these places. So they're definitely being abused and should be considered. Again, abusing OT, there's a ton of backnet protocols. These devices, HVAC in particular, and building safety, a lot of these are using old protocols. They're remotely accessible, and they provide a great network location to kind of get into the network. There's a ton of them on, if you look at what's exposed on Shodan or any of the others, there's a ton of devices that have this. There's remote access software already pre-installed on some of these devices. Some of these are, Win 7. They don't typically have security software. They're not thought about from an inventory asset. And so from a physical standpoint, they're great, juicy targets, and they're often tied to corporate networks. So how do you properly demonstrate the impact with a physical assessment? You really do have to bridge that mental gap of a lot of places to get them to understand that maintenance and janitorial crews and building security, all of them play a key role in cybersecurity, and we really have to get them on board so that they can think about and deploy these things securely from the get-go and identify the real business risks so that they can work with people like janitorial crews to train them on, don't open doors for people, don't let them into buildings at certain times. Really understanding the importance of keeping their badge secure and what the impact of those are. So demonstrating that impact and really correlating the mental picture to the whole business, usually outside of security. Security understands a lot of the physical risks most of the time, but identifying a lot of the risks that other departments and other groups may not consider. Security guards, if you outsource some of that, having them do some of your security awareness training so they realize, what tailgating looks like, what some of the tools are, how by gaining physical access, someone could, destroy a company. Really identifying with them and bringing that personal. So making sure that you're able to demonstrate that risk and properly articulate it. And really the other key highlight is not everyone should do physical security. This is something that we often advise most of our clients against. Unless you're very, very mature, unless you've got physical security and you've got plans and you've got the ability to make some of those cultural changes and your culture can really adapt to that, you end up with a lot of time and budget constraints, but you also end up with some politics. We had an incident where one of our, I believe he was a CISO, he got fired by the top level because the politics just did not play out in his favor. There was a shooting there earlier. We, happened to ramp up our engagement, put on some masks and try and set alarms off. Well, ISP was there with armed guns, and we asked if there's armed guards there. They said no, but they'd outsourced their security to ISP for this particular place. And there was a lot of politics and backplay that we didn't understand, and that cost someone their job. So really understanding the politics, being able to ask the right questions during your scoping and ROE calls, your locations and associated risks. Like I said, I've done a ton of these out of the country, and there are places that if we had been caught with some of the tools we had, or even getting through the airport, we've had to buy off people. We've had to spend a lot of time in locations I'd rather not think about because of the associated risk. Again, we've done places where there's embassies close, and there's another level of risk there. You can't just look shady. You can't be carrying around like bomb making equipment in your backpack. You're going to get stopped and you're going to get interrogated, or you may have an MP5 pointed at your face if you pop out the wrong door. So those are things you have to associate and consider the risk, and that may not be something that you want to do a physical for. There are occasions and there are reasons that this organization did do it and it was valid. So when you get to do those, they're fun, but they're also very risky. You make sure you do your homework and do it seriously. And making sure that the organization understands proper corrective behavior, doing positive reinforcement. We shouldn't be having people fired. Janitors shouldn't get fired. Companies shouldn't get fired. Employees shouldn't get fired for letting some of these things happen. Really helping them identify and change their culture of how do we get people to want to be better at security, making it relatable to them personally, and positively reinforcing those actions, not doing negative reinforcement where you're coming down. You make it a learning exercise for everybody and do that top down, take responsibility. So make sure the company, organization, and culture fits for that. Whew, we are speed running through this and I'm almost out of time. So a couple pro tips just to get through this. Check out your implant device when you're leaving that behind. Program multiple wireless APs in advance so that if you do lose access to that, you can remote in. You can put a hotspot within the vicinity of it, which allows it to gain access. You can set up RDP and get in there and troubleshoot maybe a network issue, or maybe change a MAC address that they blocked, or an IP address they blocked. Label different implants as fire, safety, or alarm, or monitoring equipment. There's a ton of kind of pro tips here. Don't go into these organizations with all your elite red team stickers. Have a professional looking laptop that blends into the company. Overdress. Make sure you got a clip-on cover to the back to cover up all your elite stickers. Conference rooms are great places to kind of get in and sit down. And I've actually kicked people out of conference rooms, letting them know I'd booked it and they're going to have to reschedule and move out. So, being very authoritative when you know you should, and knowing when to cut and get out without getting caught. Finding coffee and walking into doors with hands full, you'll get the door open for you more times than not. Having lots of delayed pingbacks with VPN, ngrok, open proxy, utilizing tools like TeamViewer and LogMeIn for backdoors and egress points, ways to get out of the network. Again, there's a bunch of pro tips. You can look at these on the slides. Making sure that you ensure all your gear set up with MAC bypasses. You've got all your scripts ready. You've got them printed out. Sometimes having a public repository available so you can get to those in case you get onto a device and you don't have access to anything, your phone's not working, have some of those. So I'm working on a mind map, and I've dumped that out to my site, darkelement.io. That should be up in the next few weeks, and I'll kind of expand on some of these concepts and ideas and pro tips, and you can kind of take a look at that as well as the slides. With that, I appreciate you guys' time from Dark Element, Trimarc, company I work for to my day job, and Security Weekly, the podcast. You guys are amazing. I love the stuff that John and team has done. We couldn't do this without tireless effort and free stuff that you guys give away to the community. heartfelt gratitude to the level of commitment you've shown to companies and security and securing the world as a whole. So with that, appreciate it.
Thank you. Fantastic. Do we have a little bit of time, Corey, for some questions?
Sure.
Let's see what we got here.
One of the most common questions I saw was they were asking about your Dropbox that you showed in one of the slides, the device that had an antenna and an Ethernet jack on it.
Yeah, this is a device I found many years ago, and I've since been working with the company to get them to make some custom ones. They've not done the full custom one yet, but the new ones are pretty nice. I'll put a link in the Discord. This device works very well. In fact, most of my implants are Windows. It blends in. You can rename it to kind of match the corporate stuff once you sniff the network. This little box is hard to find, very, very reliable, runs off a USB power, so you can do a lot of cool things with it. And it's, a 4 gig Intel M something or other with NIC and Wi-Fi. It's great. And it supports injection, so pretty cool.